like to start off with what I mean when I say contemporary shamanism. In all of the tribal histories of the roughly 10,000 different ethnic groups that have existed on the planet over the last 100,000 years, and the 10,000 languages, there has typically been a word in each language. In Siberia and some of the eastern tribes, the word was shaman. And as the last couple thousand years have been primarily a patriarchal expression of our human culture, that has referred to a man. What I mean when I talk about contemporary shamanism that differentiates from many of these traditions are a couple of small but important things. One is it does not refer to gender. Two, it does not refer to a role that is what would be known as a hermit, a separation from the tribe, a separation from contemporary and modern life. And three, it does not set up a polarity, but rather a partnership with the tools that are available to us through science and our left brain. It's not a war with science, it's not a war with the world. Rather, it's a coming together of the best tools available in all worlds. And another distinction is in every technology throughout history, there's typically been a light and a dark expression. The light expression being about creating healing, creating well-being, restoring balance. And the darker expression being more of an exploitation in a dualistic sense of gaining something at the expense of another, raping the environment rather than partnering with the environment, taking something from another people rather than partnering to learn and grow together. And so another important ingredient in my use of contemporary shamanism is a sense of using whatever technology is available on all levels, materially, energetically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, for one specific purpose, to create and co-create well-being. Another thing that I think makes contemporary shamanism different from ancient or traditional shamanism is the slow movement from continents to countries to communities to families to individuals, where in traditional shamanism a number of lineages were passed down from generation to generation. And in my own experience of contemporary shamanism, the thread or the cord that I've woven out of all of these different threads is much more individual. And so rather than putting this forward as any kind of objective path, I want to express this as my path in the ways that I've found useful to weave the inner and the outer world together to create well-being. One of the important principles of shamanism is balance. Balance between the worlds, balance between different dimensions, balance between the masculine and the feminine. And I thought I would weave together the making of this video with the journey of making this video to illustrate what I'm talking about on this level. So I had the inspiration for this video while having a very shamanic massage with a Thai practitioner who I spent time teaching over the last 3 sessions how to touch my body in just such a way as to allow the deepest emotional flow. So it's a very, very slow, very, very present touch. And the fruits of taking the time to articulate the 5 different elements of the specific form of healing touch that evokes the greatest depth in me is a gestalt of images. A gestalt of images that included this video. Now, the birthing of any creative project or any act begins by creating the environment, the womb, the location, which for me is the choice to be in Thailand, the choice to be in Phuket, the choice to be in one of the most rural areas of Phuket, the choice to pick a male masseur who is incredibly present, the choice to tune into my body, the choice to articulate the nuances of what I was learning from that tuning in, and the choice to communicate that to him, to value the nuance of the environment enough to include him, and the choice to prioritize all of that, not knowing what would be born, but knowing that when we respect our deepest self, that what is born tends to be in alignment with who we are. And that shamanism ultimately is the art of going into the unseen world and finding that which is most beautiful that we already are, and chipping away at the veils so that that beauty is revealed on this physical dimension, emotionally, mentally, and physically. And at this point in the journey of the creation of a video blog, I could feel a resonance that there's a core center that I'm referencing, and I'm looking at different possibilities and projects, and I'm referencing which of those strengthen that core center, and which of those projects, while beautiful and creative, while profitable, while whatever, tip me off center, which strengthen and which take me off center. So I want to bring you into that moment where the images are gestating and the energy is coming alive in response to the images. Well, one of the challenges we all have with the limited memory associated with the verbal brain is that we can only hold a few things in it at a time. And that's when I picked up my phone during the massage, pressed record, and began noting some of the images and making a list of topics that I thought relevant. Shortly after that, I looked online on GoDaddy and looked at the domain. And shortly after that, I sent a quick dictation to my assistant to create a logo and to set up a website referencing several other websites that we'd built, and I sent that off to them. And I want you to feel with me this particular balance, and it's the balance of opening up to a possibility, and then the dance, which can either, in capturing that possibility and holding too tightly, can tip us off balance, can lose track of the energy. And on the other side, letting go and letting it flow through as just one more amongst the infinite possibilities that we will never act on or not act on today. That there's this balance. And I know for myself that the joy that I experience opening up to a new possibility coming through is so desirable that I want to hold on immediately. I want to grab it. And so it took an effort realizing that I was being pulled off of the joy of the energy by the attachment to the structure, to the details, to the nuances of the images. This is the masculine-feminine dance in every creative process, where there's the joy of giving birth, and there's the freedom of allowing infinite possibilities, and there's the attachment to the exact shape that we first felt the energy in. I want that, and I don't want anything else. I want that, and I want it at this time and in this way, and I want it now. And there's a balance between these two energies, because the one risks an expansiveness that is so fluid that, like a pipe that water is always moving through, at the end of the process it's empty as it began. And millions of liters of water have moved through that pipe and it's now empty. And on the other hand, there's a pipe that is so shut that with the first little drop or so of water, it closes down. And the life of that flow is blocked. And so for me, in that moment, breathing, letting it go for a while, seeing if it still wanted to hang around, enjoying the massage, remembering my masseur and smiling at him, coming back to the core, and then a little dictation, and coming back to the core, and letting it bubble up. And my normal, rational brain is very humble to the distractions of modern life. And so I left that massage, first of all, giving my masseur a 50% bonus tip to honor the generosity that's coming through, to honor the quality, and to honor the contract that in our contract with all the energy around us, there's always a give and take. The greatest flow is when there's give and take, when there's an exchange. And this is one of the areas that shamanism can help us, because in the external physical world, it sometimes looks, when we shut one eye and just look materialistically, it sometimes looks as if we're more abundant by withholding. And yet, when we look at both eyes, we actually see we're more abundant when we're giving. When we look at both eyes, we see the balance of giving and receiving. And one of the greatest joys of engaging in the contemporary aspect of being a business owner is the joy of learning and respecting money and business enough to create an abundance of money and business, to be able to give it generously in those areas such as shamanism, where our culture is so unwilling to acknowledge reality and value that it's a tighter area to bring money in those areas that are still, to some extent, culturally taboo. And so back to this process, bicycling back to the hotel, checking in with my girlfriend, preparing the knapsack, a new journey is unfolding. And I had just the perfect place to make these videos, which was this simmering cicada, butterfly, and yellow flower garden that I stumbled on in the mountains just a few days ago, following a thread. Sometimes, again, opening up to the energy flows, I always start with a logical plan, and yet it's like a scent is coming in from the side and saying, off up here, off up here. And my mind is trying to say, what's off up there? And the scent says, something good, something good. And my mind is saying, oh gosh, am I going to be running around looking like an idiot here to myself, if not to anyone else? Am I willing to be the fool? Am I willing to be the fool and go off into the unknown? And one of the most beautiful parts of creating expanses of time where all of my responsibilities are met is that I can follow that fool's path. And so I had just the perfect place to make this video. And I got on the motorbike and started cruising towards that secret garden. That secret garden that was still, that was completely unpopulated, that had no distractions. And yet, when I came to the junction in the road, that scent, there's life. There's life this way to the right. There's life this way to the right. But it doesn't fit with my plan. It doesn't fit with my plan. My images of this video, of this gathering of thoughts, was in the stillness of the forest. The stillness of, they're not buttercups, but they're even bigger, and there's this cloud of yellow buttercup flowers all around. It was one of the most beautiful gardens I've ever seen, and it's out in the wild. That was my plan. Those were the images that I'd gotten. And yet life is pulling me off to the right, off to the right. And I have this hesitation. Am I going to get lost? Am I going to follow a scent that's going to dry up and I'll have no idea where I am? Or will I be able to consciously understand what's going on here? And so I go off to the right, feeling a little bit kind of suspicious of that feminine scent, taking me off into the unknown of chaos, a little bit suspicious. Am I gonna just feel like an idiot rather than realize the majestic journey of the fool? The fool in the expansive sense of the world, in the tarot arcana, that fool that takes you off into the unknown, the invisible world. So I drove around and I got lost. And yet, I remembered this beach, which I'd been to before. I thought, is that where this scent is leading me, to this beach? And the place where my road came out from being lost was exactly opposite the road going to this beach. And as I crossed the road and wove along to this little-known beach, out at the tip past the public Rawai area, I had a sense of flow. And I don't know, and I don't need to know what the situation is or how it's unfolding. I just watch that. Having gotten to the beach, I had a plan again. I had a plan because I knew where I put the camera and do this and do that, because it made sense. But when I got to the beach, I wanted to take a swim. And I was again in that same confusion, that same, this isn't what I had in mind. This isn't what I had in mind. And going out into the water, I had a new idea, a new possibility for placing the camera. And I don't know if it's going to work out perfectly. I can't tell what the sound is like. And children playing with their dogs and different things. And yet, part of what shamanism is, it's not one or the other, but it's making room for the feminine presence of spontaneity, of joy, of emotion, and of new possibility. And it's honoring the masculine groundedness that's saying, yeah, I'm not going to take the camera out swimming. This is the point where I need to put my shoes to be above the waves. I can kind of see that if there's a lull in conversation, I won't pick up dogs and children here, so let's play with it. Let's see. There's not a certainty here. But let me give spontaneity a chance. Let me give the waves, let me give the water, let me give the flow of the day a chance to take me somewhere more beautiful than I was able to consciously design. So let's dive in and explore different aspects of shamanism. And the first place I want to start is in that duality, in that paradox, in the opposite of what might be considered traditional shamanism. And it's grounded responsibility for the mundane world. So I'll just talk about that for myself. At age 14, when I was figuring out what business I wanted to be in and what kind of career I wanted to create for myself, I wanted something that I could do, that I could be my own boss. And this is important because I'm on this beach taking a 2-month vacation because because of that decision. Because of that decision to, one, work for myself. Number two, choose a path as a landscape designer and installer that gave me a lot of present alone time to check in with myself. Three, I've loved studying business, the art of selling. Wonderful mentors, including Brian Tracy and Zig Ziglar and Earl Nightingale. The art of providing exceptional service and creating wealth. Again, Brian Tracy, Napoleon Hill, a variety, Stephen Covey, a variety of business mentors where in my teens, I'd listen on my Walkman, and creating wealth, this is magic. Going to the library and requesting that they order the $70 courses that I wanted to listen to, which when I was 14, 15, 16, that was 1 or 2 days work. And so requesting those at the library and going on walks and investing in a Walkman so that I could digest and receive the gifts of my teachers, of my mentors in the material and business world. And I want to take a moment to really throw a little bit of a playful bump in some of the stereotypes about business, because one of the great truths that we learn in business is, one, there's no free lunch. There's a price for everything. We may be able to negotiate it. We may be able to determine what that price is. But there is a price for everything. And three, if you watch what people do with their time and their money, you will see without doubt what their values are. And business is that terrain which allows us to explore that. It forces us to be honest. Because one of the great, turning to another area of shamanism, sustainability and balance. A sustainable relationship with the planet, with ourself, with the earth, is a relationship that feeds both. It is a practice that generates more wealth than it takes. And business is a training ground where you get to see that day in and day out by watching your bank account. You get to see, did your net revenues, your net cash flow, and your net worth go up or down hour by hour by hour? You can't lie in business if you want to see the truth. You can't look candidly at what's happening and pretend that it's not. But you can do that in other areas. You can have debates about global warming. You can have debates about whether a relationship is good or bad, or should I do this or should I do that. But there's no debate. If a month ago you had 10,000 in the bank, and today you have nothing and 10,000 in debt, those numbers tell you that in 1 month you have done things that have cost you $20,000. in net worth. And that's beautiful because you learn about sustainability. And so grounding in what works, respecting material things, respecting the earth, respecting the laws that say that if you build a stone wall like this, it'll stay up for 100 years. And if you build it like this, the next time a little deer comes along and walks along the top, the whole wall will fall down. It respects the truth of nature, the truth of matter, and allows you to become a partner with that truth. And so I'm really grateful to my field to teaching me so much of the principles, the design principles I've learned in life have been a result of the basics of money, the basics of trust, the basics of what works and does not work in a garden. Because again, one of the beautiful things in gardening is if I put a rose in a shady corner of a garden and that rose withers and dies, we are intelligent enough not to hold the rose responsible, but rather the gardener. The question is not why did the rose choose to die? The question is, who is the gardener that didn't know that a rose needs sunlight? And yet, people are like roses. And each of us will blossom and bloom in one environment. And each of us will wither and die in another environment. And part of the great challenge and part of our great responsibility to our spirit and to ourselves is to find out which environment will bring out the best in us, will help us bloom. And in my case, for example, the environmental mix that feels right in response to those questions is working roughly 4 hours a day in material issues. I work longer in terms of my writing and other things, but around my running my business, working about 4 hours a day. And then roughly every other month, taking a month off and using that time to, at the present, I'm spending a lot of time in Thailand and the Philippines because I find that it's roughly 2 times easier in this location to give birth to something that feeds my heart and soul than it is in my home. And that when there's no business on the horizon, not because I'm ignoring the bills, not because I'm betraying promises, but because I've said no so many times. I've said no to debt. I've said no to having children. I've said no to engaging in friendships that are taking more than they're giving, often to both people. A requirement for a relationship for me is that it feeds both people more than it takes. That it's in integrity with the values that both people bring to the table. And I've said no to the relationships that don't meet that criteria. And the result of saying no, and the result of saying yes to the things that allow me to position myself to be in this moment in time, in this space in the world, in this region of my psychology, in this region of my brain. All of those are the basics that make contemporary shamanism possible. So let's look at a couple of the areas and terrains. And I'll just pause and give my body a break. So the first part that I want to begin, because for me it's been one of the most important, is what I'll call relationship culture. And this is not just the person or the people one chooses to be in relationship with, but it is the conscious intention with which we use our masculine focusing ability to make agreements about the culture and the values and the practices that we want to do to become the people we want to be in relationship with one another. And in our modern day world, that means not assuming some pretty basic things. For example, is this a relationship that tolerates white lies? Or is this a relationship that always speaks the candid truth? What's our agreement and mutual decision around that? 2, what is the agreement and expectation around transparency? Is it one that we always speak the truth, but we have areas that we keep hidden from one another? Or do we always speak the truth and proactively include one another in such a way that we help one another see the blind spots in the relationship, to see all of who we are, in our dark and in our light shadow? 3, what are the communication agreements that we have? Is our relationship at a depth, and or is it our preference that we agree that we will respond to one another within 24 hours or let the other person know that something unusual is going on? Or is it I will respond to you when I feel like it, and if I never respond to you, that's because I never felt like it. But we're still friends. I just won't answer anything I don't feel like. What's the agreement, and does it work? Is it in sync with who both people are? What does a good ending look like? If you no longer want to be as close to me, or I no longer want to be as close to you, what is our agreement? Do we just give each other hints by not returning calls and stuff like that? Do we take longer and longer? In other words, do we do it indirectly? Or do we, for example, as I have with many of my ending agreements, have an agreement that the moment one of us decides that this relationship is not growing and in alignment with who we are, we let the other person know, 1. And 2, we make time in the next 3 days to honor a conscious closing that includes appreciating one another for all the gifts that we've received, and a clear sense of what our engagement is after that time. Do we have a cooling off period of no contact, as in the case of a deeply passionate lover relationship, where it may take some time to come back to center, and meeting each other in that period is going to continuously throw us off. And so we honor a 30-day period of no contact to support both of us in coming back to the new us that is on the other side of that relationship. And going into contemporary shamanism as we enter a relationship is the basis upon which we pick relationships, a basis of finding someone who values growth ahead of hedonism. I mean, hedonism is wonderful. Growth is wonderful. But for some people, hedonism is first and growth is second. For others, growth is first and hedonism is second. And does it mean selecting people who share our priority of being conscious and hedonistically conscious rather than hedonistic and conscious when manageable? And how consciously do we create the relationships that we want? And in my case, one of the most pivotal aspects of creating a shamanic relationship is looking at the woman and her willingness and capacity to love the little boy in me and the little girl in herself. And I want to teach you a little bit about the principle that's behind that. Because in Western culture, this is actually very taboo. There's an immense amount of baggage around that. And yet, in the shamanic world, where all of us is happening simultaneously, our 2-year-old, our 5-year-old, our 10-year-old, our 15-year-old, it's all happening simultaneously. If we're feeding our 2-year-old poison and we're feeding lobster to our 43-year-old, we're actually undermining the present moment, because the health of our 43-year-old is, in a shamanic sense, predicated on the health of our inner children, our inner adolescent, all the ages that have given birth, because we are the flower. We are the flower, and the child is the root. Now, the child is dirty and muddy. That's what roots are. But the root is more sacred than the flower, because if you have a healthy root, another flower will grow. If you have a healthy flower and a sick root, once that flower is dead, which it will inevitably become, there will be no more flowers. To tend a plant, you take care of the root. And this is just one of the many lessons I've learned as a gardener. And so these are some of the ways that in contemporary relationship, whether it's an online heading or whether it's a question, you meet someone, there's so many wonderful and attractive people. What are the most important qualities for you in your next partner? What are the habits and patterns that you'd like to let go of, that you've noticed in some of your recent relationships? And what are the habits and qualities that you'd like to consciously create? 1. And 2, what's your thought about how to do that? Because in the shamanic realm, there's the full spectrum from, the ungrounded, ephemeral mindlessness and irresponsibility of no structure and no container, to the complete scientific, I'll only trust it if I see the data of a double-blind experiment in a laboratory in triplicates. And if it's repeated, that's the only thing I'll measure. And so in between that, there's this very big terrain. And we need to be mindful that while there's a middle ground that's very rich, being on either side of those extremes having a desire but no plan whatsoever and no willingness to create a plan is generally doomed. And having a plan that is so rigid and logical and articulate that has no room for life is also similarly likely to be doomed, even if you succeed, because this is a video about shamanism. There are recipes, and you can follow those recipes to the letter, and you can create something. And yet the soul and the life can be lost in the process of creating. And so I look for people who open up to their feminine spirit, but that value that femininity enough that they are willing to create a plan. And it's not just a plan of waiting to see what the universe brings. It's a plan a little bit like my journey in creating this video, where I had the vision of this beautiful garden. And as the light is fading now, we're going through a beautiful Thai sunset right now. As the light is fading, this may be concluded tomorrow in that garden, because the light will reach a point soon where we can no longer film. And yet, I don't know for sure. I now have two logical places here and there that I know of. And yet, it's quite possible the scent, that fragrance, as I'm making my way towards my plan, may surprise me again and take me to a new place. It's the willingness to follow a plan when chance, when serendipity, when the scent doesn't come. But it's also the willingness to give up that plan when something more beautiful comes along. And there's that balancing point of being absolutely clear, confident, and willing to create something with vision, with logic, with reason, with precision, with science. And willing to let it go, to let life come in that is so much more beautiful. And so this is part of that balancing act. And so I'm impatient, frankly, when I meet someone who has a little bit of a sense of life, but has no willingness to formulate a plan or a goal to create it. And at the same time, I'm sad when I meet someone who has nothing but plans, and they will follow the plan to the letter. But whether or not they achieve the plan, there's a lifelessness, a deadness, a disrespect to their own feminine self that makes it painful to be present for the successful execution of a plan that had no soul, no spirit. And this is the balancing act. So I'm going to cover one more topic, and then we'll kind of let this sit and germinate over the evening. Within the relationship sphere, there's the magic of touch. The magic of touch, which, going back to the beginning of the video, gave birth to the ideas, the pictures, the images that I'm doing my best with my lineal mind to catch up to house in words that are friendly, to house in language that is loud enough for the microphone to pick up, but not so harsh that it hurts my throat. There's that balance. And in relationship, there's a percentage of people, 10, 20%, who are what's known as highly sensitive. We can reference Elaine Aron's book, The Highly Sensitive Person. These are people who are unusually, for our culture, connected with their bodies. They are unusually present to emotion, to non-sensory perception, to hypersensory perception. They are often hypersensitive within their bodies, very affected by other things around them. And what I've noticed, accidentally at first, but then consciously woven together, is that with such people, when they are in complete integrity with themselves in their touch, when they come more into their body with a touch, rather than leaving their body to obscure, to escape the emotions that are brought up with touch. And when touch is seen as an instrument, and the body is seen as an instrument, it becomes very much like a Rubik's Cube, where if you touch in this way and wait 5 seconds, and then touch in this way and take 3 seconds to make the pass, and say these words about these images that are coming to consciousness, and then pause and wait and induce breathing, that a floodgate can open, and energy that has initially no name can come pouring forth through sound, through vibration, through shaking, through movement, through imagery. Energy can come pouring forth, multidimensional energy. And the art of a shaman is to bless the energy that comes present into their domain, is to bless and honor the tears, to bless and honor the grief, to bless and honor the love, the terror, to honor the guest that enters the body through the miraculous tapestry of touch and time. Touch, pressure, time, sequence, words, breath, imagery. And when you hold that core, that intention of honoring what is there and loving the truth that is coming through one's partner and coming through oneself, there is an accelerated vortex that is created that's like nothing else. It's the synergy of what two people can create together. Two people becoming as one, acting in accord to honor the third energy, the third color that is created in the overlap that is unique to us and them, unique to we. It is created in that tapestry. That when we honor and bless that domain, it's like a black hole. We can be catapulted light years through our own psyche into regions of perception, of bliss, of nuanced language, of nonverbal language, catapulted through time, through left brain to right brain, through upper brain to lower brain, on journeys within the psyche and within the psyche of our partner, in which God, Goddess, all that is, becomes that much more beautiful, that much more complex, because we see something sacred in ourself, in our partner, something sacred, something ineffable, just beyond words. And yet, our words can take us up to that moment. And when we pick a partner who is not afraid to look deeply at us and at themselves, when we pick a partner who honors the deep waves that are right beneath the surface of our culture's shame and terror and trauma, that are right beneath the surface, and celebrate them, and celebrate ourselves, we can go on a journey. We can go on a journey that we could not get there logically. It's a logical journey. It's completely scientific. It's just our imagination and our technology is so dismal compared to the elegance of this black hole that sucks us through into a moment that we could not logically and linearly arrive at. That we receive the blessing of transcendence, of transformation. And this is why I say and believe that deep, committed, conscious partnership that honors each part of our body, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, is the quickest path to alchemy, to transformation, to transcendence, to evolution. It's also why, when that is available, regardless of the fact that I can be physically aroused by 20% of the female population, it's not worth the trade-off to betray any part. That's why it's not worth the trade-off to betray any part of myself or my partner to have a romantic sexual experience outside of the relationship, if it means compromising that integrity. And if you have a clear agreement, which I always have a clear agreement with partners, sometimes it's an open agreement, sometimes it's completely monogamous. Whatever it is, it needs to be clear in its intention and its physical form. For example, no genital contact with the intention of arousal is a very clear physical and intentional boundary. If you hang out in clothing optional communities and hot tubs, etc., there is going to be occasional incidental genital contact without the intention of arousing. There's also going to be body contact that is not sexual in nature. So that's my boundary. No genital contact with the intention of arousing. It may also include other things like kissing on the lip, kissing on the cheek. Dry kiss is fine, no wet kissing. Or body rubbing and holding is fine, no nipple sucking, or no mutual masturbation. Whatever the boundary is, be kind enough and honor the spirit, the clarity of your container to spell it out. To spell it out and then hold true to it. Now, this doesn't mean that if you find your imagination and your life moving off in another direction, this doesn't mean you don't immediately talk with your partner about that and sit down and say, hey, I'm noticing that more of my energy imaginally and sexually is moving off in this direction, and we have an agreement that precludes that. And so I'm not going to act on that, but I think it's time for a conversation in which we update our agreements, in which we connect. Are we still growing together? Is there a way that we can reform ourselves to hold that energy? Or are we waning? Meaning, is one or both of our life taking us elsewhere? And in which case, it's time to activate our kind and conscious ending. It's time to activate our ending agreement and have a clean and conscious ending, to make room to burn to the ground and make room for new life. So this is part of the clarity and the sacredness that can give birth to the trust, to the vulnerability that makes those enormously beautiful and ecstatic journeys into other realms possible, probable, and safe for both people. Because you cannot ask someone to go deeply into themselves in ways where they don't know what's there if you're not holding a safe container. And if you say, fine, I'm not going to hold a safe container, and I'm not going to expect my partner to go into any of those deep and sacred terrains, you've just reduced the relationship from its vast dimensional possibility down to something that is either a recipe of betrayal if someone stumbles into that deep love and into that deep sacred space, or is 15% of what it could be. And the trade-off is sexual variety. Sexual variety at 15% potential, or a monogamous partnership, or a monogamous triangle, whatever the agreement is, that truly honors both places. But it's important to know that in the psychic terrain, in the emotional terrain, there are places in every single human psyche in which we absolutely need to be the only consideration for one person. It doesn't matter who that person is, but if that person is our partner, if we want to enter those states and not encounter the scarring of betrayal, we must enter those states with a sacredness that we absolutely need our partner to be there only for us in that moment. And we need them to be there for us until we have put our pieces back together again. And this is why the deep journeys always begin with two people who have the wisdom, who have the experience to willingly choose to use their freedom to choose anything, to willingly and mutually choose one another. That the only value of all that freedom is the power to choose one person to be totally there for, who is simultaneously choosing you to be totally there for you. And that can be a month, a week, a lifetime. Where you can go when you have a relationship that is totally there for you, and where you are totally there for them, mentally, emotionally, financially, physically, sexually, is 100 times more potent than where you can go in a, hey, let's see what happens, see you next week, let's keep it loose. There's nothing wrong with the latter. But you sacrifice 85% of the terrain in a sustainable form And this is one of the expressions of contemporary shamanism. In the contemporary shaman's mind, the inner world of possibility is as valuable as the outer world. So it's not black or white. It's not saying there's no value in sexual variety. It's not saying there's no value in relational variety. It's not saying there's no value in emotional variety. It's saying that there's a tension between those two, and that the contemporary shaman weighs each of those equally. And the looking, the question that decides the balance is what is the pathway to well-being. Of all the different choices available, what is the most potent, the most integrous, the most beautiful doorway to well-being for all involved? So as our night comes to a close, we're going to take a moment just to bless this beautiful bay, this beautiful water. It's been honoring us with its breath, with its waves. Honor this beautiful country. Thailand is a country that honors the feminine in men and women like no other, which is why the blessing of this video came to me through a man, touching my body tenderly, slowly, and gently, with no sexual agenda. Touching my heart with his love, touching his heart with my love, and ending a day with gratitude.